inviting guest is Mr. Ewing present? Yes, right in front of me. Sorry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Kause. It's been a while since I've been here, and I see some new faces. Belated compliment to the people who step up and join in running our fine city, and congratulations on your having been elected. It's been a while since I was here. In fact, it's kind of hard to remember where I was at. But I believe we had just finished the Civil War. And the 3 points I made in the last briefing, the soldiers and their families, Cates's district, had put their lives back together and moved on with their farms and life as best they could after the end of the war and what we referred to as the occupation. They had continued with the Reconstruction, which is the people from the North like to call it. It had instilled in them and their children a dislike for Northerners, which they called Yankees, and we still do, and for Republicans, which they referred to as scalawags. Mr. James Sawyer, a very young man, and Mr. Joseph Thomas Snell had arrived in this community. Sawyer and Snell built their store at the southwest corner of what is now is US 78 and 124. It's a service station, tire store there now. About 1879. Around this hub, a community grew. It grew fast for the times, and as the community grew through the years, it provided merchandise, religion, schools, government. And I will cover James Sawyer and Joseph Tom Snell and their lives in later presentations. Charles Sawyer, the third of the group that came, James's older brother, married a local girl and moved to Alabama, where his wife's family had moved, and he remained there and raised his family and had a business over in Alabama. The 1880 census shows that James Sawyer was living in the house with Joseph Thomas Snell as a boarder. He had been away trying to find his brother who had gone back up north, and he had returned and was living in the home with Tom Snell as a boarder in 1880. A comparison of the 1860 census and the 1880 census shows only a population growth of about 150 total between here and here, with the relatively same number of households. Now that's over a 20-year period from 1860 to 1880. It's an agricultural community, and it's an agricultural economy. 808 of those 1,242 people are involved as the head of household in agriculture. 5 are merchants, 2 of which is Tom Snell and James Sawyer. There's 1 teacher that's recorded in the census as teachers in 1880. This is in Cates's district now. There are 3 doctors, and the 425 others are probably children. (1880 to 1889), let's talk about the local events at the crossroads. The name of Snellville appeared in newsprints in November 1882. This is an ad from Sawyer and Snell's store. They may have started out calling it New London, as you would hear frequently said. That's the folklore, and they probably did. But by 1882, the name of Snellville had been settled. Now, of course, the community of Snellville and ultimately morph into what we have now is the city of a chartered city in what we know now as Snellville. In that same year, 1882, the young men issued their own script. It's 1882. Mr. Snell is the manager, Mr. Sawyer is the cashier, and he would later in an interview express his concern about the fact that he was referred to as only the cashier. This is probably a picture of Mr. Snell before he, right after he emigrated, or perhaps before he emigrated to America. Now, I don't know whether they brought this idea with them from England or whether they copied it from other merchants, because there are other merchants in the general area who did the same thing. Rosebud, for example. Most people sitting up here probably don't know where Rosebud is. But there's a store down at Rosebud that did the same thing, and there may be other merchants in the area. Farmers would bring their merchandise in, their crops in, and they would barter with Mr. Sawyer and Mr. Snell for merchandise in the store. Sugar, salt, shoes, some cloth for the lady to make a dress, thread, needles, whatever. Whatever money was left over from the products they brought in, they gave them change in their scrip. Why? Because they could only spend it in their store. So they were controlling the economy of the community, of those people who traded with them through this process. The first church in Snellville was organized in that year of 1882, and the school probably a log cabin that was just about in the shopping center where the Kmart shopping center is, somewhere in that general vicinity. We don't know exactly where, but the church was organized in that school at that time. And that was, earlier I had talked to you about churches that were in the general area that was around there, Mount Zion, Bethany, and various others. Well, it's 33 years since the last Baptist church was built in the general vicinity. Now, when you're talking about Mount Zion, that's not 5 minutes up the road back in those days. That was a pretty good walk or a pretty good buggy ride to get to school if you were right in the Snellville area to get to the church. However, this is what the first Snellville church looked like. As a young boy, I went to that church. I had an uncle that preached there for a number of years. This was a foot washing Baptist church in those days. You can go back and research and find where less than $1 was given to the janitor to buy the proper utensils to conduct a foot washing ceremony in those days. I remember when it looked very much like that, and before it was painted. Their next church is still, that building is still standing on the west side of the main building. That's the second building that's built there, and of course you know what's there now. The following year, in 1883, the second church, the Methodist church, was organized. Also in the school, but I believe that was probably a different school. More research before I can prove that, and I will do that. That's what the Methodist church looked like. Now, the family folklore in the Snell family is that Mr. Tom Snell talked his cousin, Edwin R. Snell, into coming to America and settling in this community. He was a builder in England. He brought his family and did come. And his first job, supposedly according to the Snell family, was to help finish building this church. Compliments of Miss Catherine Bird is no longer with us. That was the morning of the last service in that building before they closed the church for a while, and they participated in the church down at Zoar and perhaps other communities while they built what is now known as the chapel over there. And that was their next church. The fellow that came and helped build the church is the ancestor of the Snells you see in Snellville today. There may be some of the family back here tonight. I don't know. But the descendants that are in Snellville are not directly descended from the man who gave us the name of Snellville, but from his first cousin. And they have been here and remained here and been strong supporters of the community and the church all these years. That same year, Mr. Snell and Mr. Sawyer began building a new store. This is 1883. Remember, this built their first building there as a wooden structure about 1879. They started building a new rock building. Unfortunately, they had some problems, and they split. And Mr. Snell sold out to Mr. Sawyer. And so Mr. Sawyer finished up the store, and in the early days, this is what it looked like. In the later day pictures, you'll see that the front of it looks a little bit different, but that was in the early days. So they were only in business together about 5 years, which most people don't realize. They were great friends in England. They were young teenagers. They went on an adventurous journey to America. But when they went in business together, things became a little different. That's what the store looked like later. This little part that comes out here, Mr. Sawyer put on there after they had invented the automobile. If you notice that gas tank there, that's a gravity flow gas pump. US 78 was right along there. That house sitting in the back you can see part of is one of the early doctors in the community's home place. You can see a residence right back here. This is on 124. That was later replaced by a cotton gin that was built in the back of it. So now they're both in business, pretty ambitious and pretty prosperous. Same year in 1883, Mr. Sawyer built his home. And I don't have a picture of that with me tonight, but you've probably seen it. There's some out here in the hallway. And he got married that year. He's now 27 years old, and he's been in America 9 years. They came to America, went back up north for a while, Mr. Sawyer did. He came back, joined his friend. They went in business together. Then they had a problem and split up. Now they've got 2 buildings, and it's only been about 10 years from teenagers who came along. In 1883, a fellow by the name of Mr. Oscar Brown arrived, and I can't find anybody in the Snellville community can remember that name. And he built a private school called Brown's Academy. It replaced the old log school that we had out here, that it probably had been in the community since before the Civil War. That needs some more research too. I'm pretty sure the Methodist Church was formed in Mr. Brown's Academy. It sits right over here where this residence is, on the corner of Henry Carr Boulevard and 78, about where that residence is. As part of the Methodist Church, that's about where that school's set. He had about 125 to 150 pupils, and his advertisements indicated that he offered high school classes, which I never knew till I found this. Didn't know there was any high school offered until we built the old rock school down here. He received a lot of accolades, but 3 years later, by 1886, he was trying to sell the academy, advertised it in the local paper to sell it. He was studying or had studied law and wanted to move on, and he did. He practiced law in Lawrenceville, served a short time as a mayor there, and then moved on to Banks County. By the way, I didn't show Mr. Snell's to do that. The store that Mr. Snell built when they split up, that's an early view of it. And if you look in this picture, which many of you have seen the painting out there, that building right there is the same building. Well, Justice of Peace Court tried 2 cases. 4 lawyers were in attendance, one being the local school professor who is now practicing law, Mr. Oscar Brown. Showed you this before. This was our courthouse. This is the Cates District Courthouse. There's talk of a railroad coming. Nobody in Snellville hardly knows about that. We're hoping this comes through Snellville. In 1888, there's more railroad talk, but of course it didn't come through Snellville. It went north, and so the nearest point is over Gloucester, a little community called Gloucester. Professor Dr. Mahaffey has opened a school. That means Mr. Lawyer Brown is gone. Dr. Mahaffey is now not only a farmer and a doctor, but he's now a school teacher. Justice Peace Court is doing a thriving business, but the lawyers didn't show up. Gwinnett Tax Digest shows that in addition to their business, Sawyer now owns, this is in 1889, 10 years after they built the first wooden store there. Sawyer now owns 228 acres of land. Snell owns 200 acres of land, and each has about 40 acres each within this land lot that Snellville is in, local land lot. They have success? Well, obviously they were having success, but now they're in competition with each other. Now they're in competition with each other. Next time I'm going to color 1890 to 1900, and then I'm going to change the format, and I'm going to start taking subjects like Mr. Sawyer, Mr. Snell, of the schools, of the churches. But the next time we're going to go from 1890 to 1900. Points to remember tonight. Young Snell and Sawyer make quite a splash. Opened a business, split, built 2 granite buildings with like but separate businesses. This all happened within a 10-year period. The community got its name, Snellville, from Mr. Snell, and I'll talk about that when I cover the family of Mr. Snell. We also got a post office at that time. That post office initially was named Snellville, and it was in the back. It was in the back of that store right there, and it operated there for a number of years until it closed. The store was a magnet for others. It was the hub around which other businesses, churches, schools, doctors, cotton gin, and blacksmiths located. It appears that the 1880s was a boom town for Snellville. Thank you very much, and I'll cover another 10-year period in my next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ewing. And at the next council meeting, we will be having a proclamation to honor the Historical Society, so please come back for that as well. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Ewing? Yep. Moving on to department reports.